Class. It's my pleasure to introduce Zainab, Dr. Zainab Dangana, who's actually one of us. Zainab achieved her doctorate with Plymouth University, but she's been working very diligently in industry for a number of years whilst completing her research. And Zainab has been using the MCDA techniques that we've looked at in the last hour and applying them in a construction context. And she's come all the way from London today overnight, had to stay overnight to come and speak to us, so we're very privileged by her presence. So really it's over to Zainab then.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you all. As John has actually said, I'm Dr. Zainab. I'll just briefly sort of say more about myself. I'm trained as an architect, and I've been working in the construction industry for over a decade. I came to the UK in 2004, and about 5 or 6 years after working in the industry, I felt there was a lot happening out there. I was very keen into the management aspect of construction, and I decided to come back and do a master's here at Plymouth University in construction management. Everybody thought I was crazy, that why am I going back? It was the peak of the recession when everybody was losing their jobs, but I chose to do that. I graduated with a distinction. During my PhD, I looked at lean, which I'm sure you might be familiar with because it's a philosophy that's more in the business school. But I used the principles of lean, which is about being more efficient, and applied it to the architectural practice I was working. And when I finished, I got the opportunity to do a PhD, and luckily it was sponsored by a leading contractor up in London, and it's been quite interesting. So today I would like to give you an overview of what the PhD was about, and I got to the end of the PhD, and obviously there were some limitations which I would like to highlight, and which led to the current project that I am currently working on, and the progress I'm actually making so far. And as part of the PhD, what I did is that I developed a decision support framework, and as John said, it's actually based upon the analytical hierarchy process, but in combination with another methodology. So the whole idea is to let you guys know that what you're doing in theory can in reality be applied in the real world industry, and that's what I'm actually currently doing. So feel free to ask any questions as we go along. If not, we would have a question and answer session. I'm not going to get a chance to know all of you, but I guess you're all sort of from the business school with a business mind there. So what I would like to do in the first instance is just to give you a very quick overview of the construction industry, because this research is focusing around that area. We hear about sustainability a lot. I mean, we have that in all industries. So in regard to the construction industry, buildings are responsible for about 50% of carbon emissions in the world. And this is a huge amount. And even within that, the non-domestic buildings actually account for about 18% of emissions are from non-domestic buildings in the UK, which is actually quite a lot. And delving into a bit more detail, I looked at the carbon emissions and energy use, which are the two key things that are looked at in sustainability. And within the non-domestic buildings, we have buildings like retail, commercial, offices, banks. Anything that's not a dwelling is considered non-domestic. So my research focused on the non-domestic element. And looking at that, we can see that it's not very clear, but all those are the different building types. And the retail environment actually emits the highest amount of carbon emissions, and also is the highest user of energy. Therefore, my research has focused on the existing retail buildings and how we can actually reduce the carbon emissions and the energy used to have more sustainable buildings. And also, the government has actually set ambitious targets to achieve nearly zero carbon buildings. So there is an obvious demand that we have got to reduce the energy use and carbon emissions. And also by regulations, a building, if it doesn't have an EPC rating of G by 2018, is not going to be, it wouldn't be rentable. So there is a demand from the regulation that we've got to do something about it. So I looked a bit in detail to see what really is happening, and I found quite a few reports that say that it is possible to achieve the ambitious targets that have been set by the government using simple and cost-effective innovative products that currently exist. However, the emissions from the commercial sector, which is the light blue line in the middle, has continued to increase in the last decade, which indicates that despite the potential of these innovations out there, they are actually not being implemented. From literature review, I identified that 90 to 95% of products never get to the point of even being considered. It's not that the products are not good, but they never just get right to the right decision maker. So if you look at the technology adoption life cycle, what tends to happen with these innovative products is that they die in the chasm between the early adopters and the early majority. And these technologies have a huge potential in the construction industry, one, to reduce their energy and also their carbon, and also for financial benefits for the end users. So just to very briefly say what the research problem was, obviously it's a research I did for 3.5 years, but I'm trying to sort of really condense it down to the real key findings for you guys. So the research problem is, as a construction industry, we've got to achieve nearly zero carbon retail buildings by 2050. It seems quite a lot, but nearly zero is actually very difficult to achieve. So what the government has done is that they've set intermediate targets for us to achieve. So we have targets at 2020, 2025, and so on. So there is a need that we've got to do something drastically. Also, the targets that have been set by the government, although a lot of construction professionals think it's ambitious, but several reports have shown that it's actually achievable using simple and cost-effective technologies, and obviously there's been a slow uptake. So my research then focused on how could I improve the uptake of innovative sustainable technologies for existing retail buildings to deliver low-carbon retail buildings, and that was my focus. So, like we saw, the construction industry is quite diverse, but I've narrowed it down only to the retail buildings that I was working on. So, the first overarching research question I had was, how can the uptake of innovative technologies be optimized for existing retail buildings to reduce the energy use and carbon emissions, and also to improve the process of delivering low-carbon buildings? And obviously, I needed to set myself some other questions to get to the underlying problem. So I set myself 5 secondary questions to assist me in getting to my answer to what really is the problem and developing a solution. So in the first question was, how can innovative technologies actually assist? Is there a potential or is there not? So I had to do a bit of research to really prove the point that there is a potential there. Then I looked at, why is there a slow uptake of innovative technologies in existing buildings? What is the underlying problem? I then looked at what is the gap in the current decision-making methods used in selecting innovative technologies for existing retail buildings, and if there are, how could we improve them? And also, how can the selection be optimized to improve the uptake in the retail construction industry? And the final question was, can the selection be optimized by the use of a decision support framework, which is what I developed. So I'm going to go through each of those in detail to say how I answered it and what the key findings were. So this research, normally a PhD, we've got different types. Some are purely driven by academic, where you do a research and everything is just within the academic domain. I must say I've been very lucky that this is an applied form of research with an aim to solve real-world problems that was actually facing the construction professionals in the industry. Therefore, the action research approach was selected as the most appropriate methodology to diagnose the problem, develop a solution, and implement it and see whether it worked or not. And at the same time, it also contributed to knowledge in the academic domain. So the research was actually carried out as a multi-phase research in 5 phases. I actually started by doing an exploratory study with the wider construction industry to find out what really is the problem. And I interviewed retailers. When I talk about the retail industry, I was focusing on the supermarket. So my interviewers were the property team in Marks & Spencer, John Lewis, Sainsbury, and Tesco's kind. So I was lucky that through the company I had access to all these sort of key decision makers. So in the first instance I did an exploratory study to get a superficial idea of what really is the problem. I also interviewed construction professionals both within the supply chain and internationally. And after identifying the problem, I then did 3 phases within the company with a leading contractor. Where I did an in-depth case study to understand and delve into the problem in detail. I developed a framework which I would be explaining more in detail, and then the framework was validated internally. And one of the problems that I thought I would face in my viva with Plymouth University was that my external would say, does this work for the wider construction industry? Hence, although the framework does work for the business, I had to then validate it externally with the wider construction industry, just to get their feedback that what we are doing is applicable and that it's going to work. So just very briefly about the company that I work for. I appreciate you're all from the business school, so you might not sort of know about our contractors. But Waits is a leading contractor, is a family-owned business over 100 years old. It's got over 4,000 employees. It's got 16 offices across the UK. Just to give you an idea of the profits they make, they've got a total turnover of about 1.05 billion. Within the business, they've got different sectors. Like I said, the construction industry has got houses, schools, so I actually focused on the sector that actually dealt with retail and commercial buildings. So I was just in one part of the business, and I didn't sort of do this research with the entire group. And there is a website link if anybody wanted to go and do a bit of research about them. So, like I said, the findings from the research, the first phase was actually to identify what are the drivers and barriers for using innovative, sustainable technologies. I'm not going to go into detail, but what the study basically identified, it did identify a number of drivers as well as barriers, but as we can see, the barriers seem to outweigh the drivers. But then I was trying to get to the underlying problem, that what really is the problem, because people just sort of put it on superficial problems like higher upfront cost, uncertainty, risk, but there was more to it, and I really wanted to get to the bottom line. And what I identified underneath all those barriers was that the task of selecting the right product was actually a complex decision-making problem. This was due to the fact that there are multiple stakeholders involved in the construction industry. When we have a project, we've got the architects, we've got the quantity surveyors, we've got the civil engineers, we've got the electrical engineers, you've got the planning authorities, name it, you have a number of stakeholders there. So you have multiple stakeholders, and it's really hard to actually get everybody to come to a compromise because they've all got conflicting selection criteria. And that doesn't help when you've got multiple alternatives. So this is a very classic example of a multiple criteria decision analysis problem, which John has probably been covering. Coupled with that, we have the socio-political factors, and also, unlike other decisions, using innovative technologies in a building. Once a building is built, it lasts for a number of years, an average of about 50 years. So the impact that this technology is going to have on a building is actually quite important. So you need to really make that decision right. It's not a one-off that after a year, you could say it's okay. But so it's got long-term effects. So obviously, they seem to be the underlying problem that I identified from phase 1 was a complex decision-making problem. So phase 2, then, I delved into detail with the leading contractor, and I did an in-depth case study. And I did a couple of studies with them. I first of all looked at how what is the current use of innovative technologies. I looked at a number of projects, and I saw that they tend to use the same old products. And with all these new regulations, there are a lot of new energy efficient products out there. Just to sort of relate this to something that you would do. I mean, a lot of people might have had the Nokia bar phone maybe like 10 years ago, but now there are so many smartphones. But a few of you might be reluctant to take that step change. But those of you that use the phone know what the advantages are. So it's just the same thing in the construction industry, just that it's worse that the impact is not on one person, but on several people within the business and also the end users of the building. And it was clearly identified that the business tends to continue using old products whilst there are more energy efficient and cost-effective products out there. So there's been definitely a slow uptake. I also then looked at the current process that the business uses in selecting innovative technologies. What I identified is that they do not have any process at the moment at all. What tends to happen is if they do have a product, they get together at an ad hoc basis, make an agreement. Half the time it ends in a conflict, no decision is made and nothing is done. So they do not have any structured process, although they have a structured process for existing products, but that doesn't really work for innovative. So that just confirmed my initial findings. And also, because this has to do with innovation, I then tried to understand how does the company actually value innovation? What do they think about it? And I ran a questionnaire, which was a standard questionnaire from the internet, and I identified that they actually had a low score in generating ideas and converting them. So all this just confirmed the fact that they need the support to help them in identifying those innovations and missed opportunities that they are currently missing. Is that all okay for now? Any questions? Okay, so I assume I can go on then. So the third phase then is obviously I've identified there's a need for this decision support framework. And what I did as part of the PhD, which was my main contribution, was I developed a novel decision support framework to assist construction professionals to select innovative technologies for existing retail buildings. The framework is actually based upon a methodology, and it could be used for any building types, for any project in the construction industry, and for any problem where it's a complex decision making. And it basically involves 3 steps. The first step is we've got to identify what do the key decision makers really want to do, what is the objective. So in this case, it was the business were keen to select innovative technologies that could help them deliver low carbon buildings with an emphasis of reducing energy and carbon. The second step then is to identify who the key stakeholders are, bearing in mind that you normally have numerous stakeholders involved. So it's really important that you've got to identify who the key decision makers are and what their selection criteria are. And then taking that into mind, then the third step is then to identify alternatives to suit those selection criteria and the objective that was identified. So this is probably where you guys would have an interest. So the framework actually is based upon 2 methods. One is the analytical hierarchy process, which you guys have probably done a calculation. I must admit that I've never really been involved in the calculation. I made use of Excel sheets that did all that, so well done in doing that complicated calculation. I kept myself far away from it all the time that I was doing the PhD. And so why did I use 2 methods? I obviously looked at a number of methods and tried to see which of the multiple criteria methods would really be suitable for what I really wanted to achieve. In terms of the AHP, as you all know, it's a well-established method. It's based on mathematical calculation. It allows the simplification of a complex decision-making problem. It also provides a hierarchical representation of the problem. It also handles both tangible and intangible criteria. It's got a well-defined process to do a pairwise comparison of either 2 criteria or of alternatives at a time. And the good thing about AHP also is that it gives a consistency ratio to know whether the decision makers have actually made logical decisions individually and as a group. And also, so in that essence, the AHP is actually a very good method to help to prioritize and rank those, to rank the criteria. And this is very useful in the construction industry where we've got multiple stakeholders. It's difficult if we've got 5 criteria and say, look, let's come to an agreement. We're going to have an argument there, and nobody is going to sort of come to a compromise. So with the AHP, what we're able to do is to make each decision maker go through the pairwise comparison of the criteria that they've already established. And with the consistency ratio, we are able to know whether each decision maker has made a logical decision. The consistency ratio would vary depending upon what it is, but in my case, I kept it at 10. So any decision maker that had a consistency ratio of more than 10 were either asked to do the pairwise comparison again, or they were sort of discounted from the group. And after that, the results are normally presented to the group. And although there's a bit of a conflict, but with the AHP, we were able to come to a compromise. However, the AHP also has some limitations. What this project was trying to do was to scope out innovative products out there for the company to focus on that could give them a potential to reduce energy and provide environmental as well as financial benefits. AHP would prioritize and say, in terms of ordering, this is 1, 2, 3. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't really give go, no-go decision. So it might prioritize, but it wouldn't say whether the solution is really appropriate or not. So what I had to do was to then supplement it with another method called the directional policy matrix. And the directional matrix, it's very wordy. It was originally developed by the General Electric Industrial Group in collaboration with McKinsey, and it can be used for the selection of innovative technologies. And what the DPM consists of is basically 9-cell grid there, 3 by 3, and it's got criteria on the x-axis and criteria on the y-axis. And what I did was that I made the use of AHP to rank and prioritize the criteria, but then after those criteria were actually scored, the combined weighting and scores were then plotted onto the DPM. And what it basically does is that it gives the decision makers a go, no-go decision, and they know which of the products that they need to actually explore further. So it's got a 9 grid, and depending upon the position that the score actually falls, would determine the next steps for that innovative product. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail about the framework because I assume that's what you would like to know more about. So having developed the framework, obviously I had to validate it, and I did this in-house with the contractor, and the framework is based upon 3 key steps, which I splitted into the identification stage, the design stage, and the choice, which I organized in the form of a Green Dragon's Den. There were a number of reasons why I chose this method, although the company had said we just want innovative products, but what I realized is that I need to educate these end users, the key decision makers. So me sort of just identifying these products and giving them with them was not going to help. The suppliers bitterly complained that these end users don't know about the product. So my strategy was that I go through this process. I act as a facilitator. I use the framework with the key decision makers. They, in the first instance, sort of tell me what's important to them, which is the objective. I then conduct a stakeholder analysis to identify who the key decision makers are that need to be involved in the decision-making process. And based upon that, I then go out and launch a competition on their behalf to source the innovation. It goes through a 3-stage process, and then the finalists are brought back in front of the key decision makers, and they only have 15 minutes to present. The other thing with innovation is that the decision needs to come from the top, from the senior management level, rather than from the bottom. So the people on the site, the junior people, are quite aware about these products, but unfortunately, because of the risky and the uncertainty nature of these products, they do not have the authority to go and say, let's use it. This decision needs to come from the top. Therefore, what I have developed is a strategic decision-making support tool aimed primarily at the senior people within a business. These are people that are at the management level. So the framework is quite simple. It's not complicated. But the whole idea is to get them involved so that they're part of the process, and at the end of it, they take ownership of what comes out of it, and it has actually worked well. So the validation process went through a number of steps. I did the first study, which went through the 8 steps, which I'm going to go individually as well. And after running the first validation, I did a feedback study. Obviously, it was an R&D project to say, look, did this framework really work? Or do we need to improve it? And based upon the internal feedback, the framework was improved from the feedback from both the suppliers who took part in the Green Dragon's Den as well as the company. And the framework was retested again as study 3. And like I said, although the framework was tested internally, but I also had to get validation from the wider construction industry to see whether the framework does really work. So I had a feedback with the wider construction industry, both locally as well as internationally. So now just sort of going into detail to each of the 8 steps of the framework. The first step was to conduct a stakeholder analysis, and as I said, there are quite a lot of stakeholders involved in the construction of a project. So in the first instance, I had to actually identify who are the potential stakeholders that could be affected or be influenced by the selection of innovative technologies. It doesn't make sense getting people involved who do not have a say or are going to be impacted. So it's very important in the first instance to do that stakeholder analysis, to narrow it down to the key decision makers to get involved in. And then depending upon how big the business is, you might have to put them into groups. So within a team, you might have people that come under the engineering, you might have people that come under the planning. So you might need to then further break them down into groups. And based upon that, you do a stakeholder analysis. I'm not going to go into detail of what the specific results were, but what I want to get out there is that you need to do a stakeholder analysis for any decision-making problem to understand who the key decision makers are, get them involved in the decision-making process so they are part and parcel of it. Because what you don't want to do is to get to the final stage of your decision and not having consulted somebody who was like the gateway to your approval. So it's very important that you do that at the first stage rather than the last stage. So having identified the key decision makers, the second step I did was to describe the decision-making context and process to identify and structure the decision problem, the global goal, and the objectives. What I normally do is done as a brainstorming session, and I say, what do you want to do? You tell me what you want. I don't dictate to them. I guide them, I facilitate them. But we have like sticky notes everywhere. They put sticky notes and say, we want to do this, we want to do that. And based upon that, then we then sort of narrow it down into a hierarchy and a network where I understand what really they actually want to achieve. So what it basically does is that it provides an understanding of the decision-making context and the process, as well as structuring the problem into a hierarchy. And this is actually the most difficult step, because if you don't identify the problem right at the start, you're going to obviously identify wrong innovations or wrong solutions. So it's very important as well to get this step right. So a well-defined problem normally has good solutions as well. So having identified the key stakeholders, having structured the problem with them, identifying what their problems are, what they want to focus on, I then move on to the third step, where I then identify what their selection criteria are in detail. This is a bit linked because this goes through a 3-stage process. So the first step it actually comes from the previous step, where I pick up a number of criteria from there and transfer it to the third step. And because it came from an R&D point of view, I then looked at literature review to see what are other potential criteria that could possibly be applicable. And then based upon that, I come up with a final set of criteria. And like I said, I was looking at this as a strategic decision-making tool. We're not going into detail, but basically I was trying to sort of pick on all the barriers that the key criteria that seem to be the barriers for the key decision makers. So none of these are actually very complicated, but these are the key things that the key decision makers would have put them off. So for example, the time to implement a product, because I was looking at existing retail buildings, if that technology is going to have disruption to the building, so for example, M&S is going to be closed for a month, it's a complete no for the retailer because they're going to be at loss. So it's very important to understand. This is very interesting. The risk that the technology has on the end users is very critical to a customer. Very simple example is I think it is Tesco's, where you've got your cold food and you've got a door that you have to open and actually get your food stuff. Some retailers said that their customers, that is people like us, have complained that that door is a barrier to their product. And although it's very energy efficient, it's going to reduce their cost, but because their customers, people like us, have complained that it's a barrier to their product, they don't put it. So it's very important that if a product is going to have a negative impact on people like us, they are not going to go for it. Another classic example is LEDs. It doesn't sort of display the product in the right environment, so their products won't sell. So it's very important that from the decision-making context, you've really got to get a good understanding of what your customer wants, what the key decision makers want, and you need to work with that. So again, I looked at it from the constructor's point of view. I'm not going to go into detail, but the thing you need to sort of go away with is you've got to identify what are the key barriers that you need to sort of overcome for them to sort of make that decision. So based upon that, the criteria that were established, you guys have done an AHP. You've seen that having a lot of criteria is going to make things complicated. So obviously we've tried to limit the criteria to 2 groups with a maximum of 7 criteria, although I've only used 5 each there, but anything more than 7 will start making the process very complicated. So try and limit it to the key problems. You could have sub-criteria under each, but for the final decision, always keep it to a minimum. If not, you sort of lose the whole idea of trying to sort of break down the complex decision-making problem into a simple one, and you're actually complicating it more. So based upon those indicators, because this framework was going to be used with the strategic people, we then developed a scoring logic for each of those criteria. So for example, again, very simple, nothing complicated, but like I said, the whole idea was we need to get these people involved, let them be part of the decision-making process, take ownership of it. So the time, like I said, to implement a technology is very important. So if it's a no disturbance to the store, it could be done in the night when it doesn't affect the store trading. It's a high score of 10. If it involves partial block-up where the store can still trade, and there is a bit of a loss, but you give it a score of 5, complete closure of the store, low score of 1. So as you can see, nothing complicated there, but enough, and also bearing in mind the senior people don't want anything complicated. If I was going to make anything complicated there, they're going to, either switch off or, just, they wouldn't even be part of it. So the process has to be very simple. So the whole idea is breaking that complex decision-making problem into something simple that their brains can actually manage and actually absorb. So step 5 then was, after identifying what really was important to them, I then go out and source alternatives. And those alternatives goes through a 3-stage process. Whilst I did my PhD, I used to sort of look in magazines, go to trade exhibitions to look for these technologies. It wasn't that bad because I used to do a Green Dragon's Night once a year, so I had enough time to actually identify them. But now that I'm within the business, I'm sort of doing this more and more. So I'm trying to make the process more efficient for myself. So I'm in the process of actually establishing a link on the Wade's website where I can launch my competitions and say we have a customer that is looking for a technology that would help them save water, and then these suppliers would then actually come to me and then go through my process. I'm in the process of establishing that. So the first process is basically a yes-no. It's not that a product is not good, it's just that it doesn't sort of fit the criteria of the key decision makers. So the customer might have said he wants a water-saving technology, but this technology is probably a window technology. So it doesn't just fit into the criteria. It's really good, but it's not appropriate in this instance. The second step then is to do a detailed analysis to see, do these products really work? Are they what they say? So what I do here, now that I'm within the business, I've got a support team within the business, from the technical, from the supply chain. So they help me screen these products and eliminate the ones that are not really appropriate. And then, sorry, I think I'm going to sneeze. And from that, they are narrowed down to about only 5 or 7. So I normally start off with about 50, 20, 5 or 7 there. And the whole idea is to then present this 5 or 7 to the key decision makers in the business. What this process does is that it saves the time of the key decision makers within the business exploring all these products that are not good. And what has happened in the past is that the management company has probably spent their time on a few products that are not good and hence put them off. Hence, they are not really keen. So what we do is that we take that task off them and do all the groundwork and identify only potential ones where they come in. So the final step, I organize it like a Green Dragon's Den. This was because I feel it's very important that the key decision makers need to be educated. So before they come in on the day, I get all the key decision makers to do a AHP survey. Basically, I give them an Excel sheet. I didn't have privilege to even the software, unfortunately. So I went onto the internet and I was able to download an Excel sheet, and I tested it that it does work. And so each participant is emailed this with a set of criteria, and they have to say which is more important and by how much more important. What they don't know, and as you all know about AHP, is that they don't know what weighting or ranking they're giving. It's till I sort of put it into my magic Excel sheet that it tells me that decision maker A has actually thought about this criteria as the most important, and so on. Again, as I mentioned about the consistency ratio, with this I can know whether the decision makers in the room have made logical decisions or not. And I based my one around 10%, so as far as it was less than 10%, they were included in the group. And based upon that, I then present the result back to them. So that's an example. P1, P2, P3 basically stands for the participants that took part. And those were their individual ranking of the criteria, and as we can see, it's quite varied. So if I was to do that as a verbal group decision, we would have an argument, and they would probably kill themselves there with those, with the criteria we had. So with this method, it seems to work well, and they come to a compromise. And that's the final weighting and ranking for those criteria. And also, what's important about this criteria, because I did this PhD over 2 years, and when I did a Green Dragon's Den after 1 year, although the criteria remained the same, however, when we did the AHP, the weighting changed slightly. This reflects their current concern at that point. So it's very important that if you are using a framework, you actually repeat the AHP closer to the time, because things might change, their priorities might change. So even though criteria are the same, we do the AHP closer to the time just to get the accurate weighting and the ranking. Any questions?
Are you concentrating more on the renovation of buildings or new buildings?
I said it is more on existing buildings, because like I showed in the initial slides, the thing is with new buildings is that by law they have got to be energy efficient, zero carbon. So a lot is being done on new build as it is. The problem that we have is with the existing. And 80% of the buildings in the UK are still going to be starting in 2015. So it's impossible to actually demolish all the 80% buildings. So they are our priority, that we need to actually do stuff for them. So hence, and then even when I looked at the non-domestic buildings, I identified that retail buildings are the highest energy user and carbon emission. Although the research has focused on existing retail buildings, but like I said, it's a methodology. I could use it for any building type, even if it was a new build. I could go to a customer, and maybe the customer is saying, look, we're trying to sort of make this energy efficient building. We want it completely automated. So I'm going to look for all the technologies that has got automation in it. So you could use it for virtually anything. You could use it for buying a car. You could use it as a family when you are thinking of getting a house. You could use it for anything where you've got multiple stakeholders. You're not able to come to a compromise. You've got conflicting criteria. If you just use the AHP, like I said, what it does is that it would prioritize like this. So assuming you had alternatives, it would say maybe the product 1 is the most important with a weighting of the 47%. But what it doesn't do there, it doesn't tell the end decision maker what's their strategic position with that product. Do they have a potential to take it forward or not? And hence, I've had to use the DPM to give me that information for them. Okay?
So, like your company is more focused on retrofitting projects as well, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, and when I did my research, I realized that they do 10% new build and 90% retrofit. So it didn't make sense for me to focus on the minority. And I said, I better sort of, do stuff that's going to be more applicable to them. So, yes.
Are you successful in this?
Sorry?
In the sense, is your firm successful in this retrofitting?
Yes, yeah.
Are you coming with your estimated outputs as well?
Yes, yes. I actually do have a few slides that is showing how we have actually progressed from the PhD into sort of a full-time position there now. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. So based upon the criteria, we had established some indicators. So on the day, like I said, what I normally do is that I act as an intermediate person because I spend the time with these key decision makers trying to understand what they want. I spend a lot of time with these suppliers saying, look, my customer is saying they've got these problems and can you see how you can overcome it? So when they come in, their presentation is very targeted. It's not more than 15 minutes. Anything more than 15 minutes, these people are going to switch off. So we keep it very brief and concise. I said you need to emphasize on this. And on the day, each of the decision maker has got a scoring sheet that they have got to score them. So they're really actively taking part on the day. And they are the ones that score them. So I then know what each decision maker has given for each of those criteria. I've got a standard deviation, but I didn't need to use that. And based upon that, I then combine the weighting that we got from the AHP and the average score. So those are the different products that I got in to actually present. And the final results are then presented on the directional policy matrix. So as we see, anything here is a leader, meaning that these are the products that they need to explore and take further. Anything, as you can see here, it says phased withdrawal. So it means don't even look at that product. It doesn't actually suit our criteria, or disinvest. So what the DPM does, it gives a clear no-go, go decision to the key decision makers. And this has proved very useful. Because in the past, like I said, 90% of products do not even get to the point of being considered. Research indicated that it is indeed possible to reduce the energy and carbon. So there are a lot of missed opportunities only because of the complex decision-making problem of identifying the suitable products. So what this framework has done is it has helped to screen out potential products from out there, and they can then focus on those, a couple of them. Is that okay? So, like I said, I also needed to do some feedback to see how the framework has actually worked. So in the first instance, I did an internal feedback with the people within the business. So very quickly, how easy was the selection process? They said it was easy to neutral. Nobody said it was difficult or very difficult. How effective was the decision support framework in selecting the appropriate innovative technologies? Everybody said, 100% said effective. How appropriate were the technologies? Anyway, that's not really appropriate. And what I also wanted to know was, had I really identified all the key decision makers? So I had a question saying, should we involve anybody else that you think were appropriate? And I did get some feedback of who the other people are that could actually be a potential blocker if these products were selected. So within the business, just to sort of give you an idea of how the framework has worked from a practical aspect, within the business, they said the framework I mean, like I said, I worked only within the retail department, but the company has got houses, schools as different sectors. They have about 5 or 6. They were quite impressed with the framework that they actually strongly recommended it to the other sectors of the business to facilitate and support the complex decision-making problem, because they all go through this. It's a common problem across the thing. The supply chain manager who is in charge of the identifying products said it's a very useful and effective selection framework that will work as it's based on a structured process. It's currently done on an ad hoc basis. So the industry admit that they don't have anything. Having this in place is definitely a structured way of getting to a decision, to the extent that the head of energy guy said if this could actually be developed further into an app, that it could help differentiate the business, add value, and improve the customer relationship. Although that's a bit far away for me for now. But that's the feedback I got internally. So as we can see, I hope that answers your question. So it was really positive internally. What I also did, like I said, I needed to get external validation from people in the wider construction industry. I couldn't actually use the framework with them, but what I did was that I tested the principles and the theory behind it and took the opinions on what they thought about it. So the questions I asked them was, does the framework address the complex problem faced by stakeholders in selecting? And the majority said yes, yes. I didn't have any no's for that. Would you say the framework is capable of assisting stakeholders in the selection? Again, there were more yeses. Would you say the framework is simple, clear, and easy? Again, it was yes. Only one said no. It is not simple, only because it would need a facilitator. And that's true, because the whole idea was to have me involved and guide them in the decision-making process. So the reason why they said no was because it needs a facilitator. Sorry. So, as part of the research, just to sort of give you a feel of where this course could sort of, take you to. As part of while I was doing the PhD, I actually presented my research at the Association of Researchers in Construction Management in Edinburgh. I was at the World Building Conference in Australia. I was also in the ARCOM conference in Reading, and my paper based on this framework was actually selected as one of the 20 best papers out of 400. So just to sort of give you an idea of how much valued the decision support framework was in the construction industry. And I also presented in America in the Construction Research Congress. So it's been disseminated in quite a few places and a lot of positive feedback. In summary, it's like it's been considered valuable as well by the academic researchers and is useful in addressing the challenges facing the construction industry. So even from an academic domain, it's got a positive feedback. As part of the research, what I did, I had a few limitations because obviously the company has got their key account directors that deal with the customers. But I did go as a researcher and I approached a few customers from M&S, John Lewis, Lloyd's, and at Tesco's, and I sort of explained the framework and I said, what do you think about it? And they said, we would be very interested to attend the next Green Dragon's Den and if you could help us. But obviously, as a PhD student, I didn't have that right, but at least I got to the point that I know that there's an interest from all sides. Also, there was positive feedback from the suppliers that I helped because they are actually struggling. It's not that their products are not good, so this actually comes under our supply chain. They actually said that this framework has actually given them that opportunity to speak to the key decision makers and get their product knowledgeable. Any questions? Well, you would have assumed that with all that feedback, I would have been over the moon with my PhD. But when I reflected on it, when I was getting to the end, the company was happy. They got a number of products out of the Green Dragon's Den. I got my PhD. Was I happy? No. Why was I not happy? I felt I still had a mission to take forward to the next step. And if you look at innovation, innovation goes through stages. It's about identifying, it's about selecting, and it's also about implementing. So what the decision support framework did was that it actually helped the business identify and select. And obviously, as my limitation, because I was based in Plymouth and the company is based in London, I couldn't be there all the time. So I obviously got to the point of getting the right people within the business involved, and then hoping that somebody would champion these innovative products on the projects. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I said a lot of good things about this product. It's going to help you reduce your costs, it's going to help you reduce your energy, but if you don't use it, it's all lost. So for me, we didn't really achieve the last part, which is implementation. And I got to the end of it and I said, I really want to take this project to the next step, where we not only identify and select it, but we actually implement them on our products, on our projects. So hence, the most cost-effective way of taking this project forward was to do it as a KTP. The aim was, one, to support the business, select more products, but also ensure that they do get implemented. The framework was actually validated in-house, but the whole idea was to actually take the framework outside and use it with the customers as well. So it's a 2-year project that actually started in June, so I'm actually 6 months into the time. I've had to sort of make some personal sacrifices to make this happen because I'm really passionate about it. I'm based in Plymouth, I've been here for the last 10 years, but this is about change management, and I felt I needed to be within the business and have more face time, and hence I've moved myself out of my comfort zone there, waking up at 6 o'clock, being on the train for an hour and a half. Not easy, but I have a mission that I want to get to. So why are the business doing this? I've been able to convince them that, look, we are in a very strategic position between the suppliers that have got these products and the customers that are actually demanding this. And we could act as an innovation broker, accelerating the uptake of technologies in the construction industry. And by doing this, we could actually differentiate the business by doing things differently than other of our competitors. So we are offering this differently. And this has actually already started to show signs within the business. We could also then influence and support our customers' sustainability agenda. And as you all know from the business school, the customer is very important. So all this will eventually lead to having more happy customers, which would lead to having more work for the business. And this project is the only project that actually supports the WAIT's environmental strategy. And in the long run, the way I look at this project is that it's going to generate margin enhancement through this supply chain. So just to give you an example, if one of the products I identified was rolled out, was used on a Marks & Spencer, the implementation, the profit cost to the business is about $1,200. And because M&S have got numerous stores nationally as well as internationally, even if they were to roll out that product on about 10, that is 1,200 times 10, 120. So I had about 7 products. So it's just to give you an idea of the financial benefit that the company could. And I had to, convince them that fine, it would take us time to get there, but we could actually start off with the softer benefits and start differentiating ourselves. So who is on the project? I've had to get the key decision makers involved, because if you don't have the top level engagement, I'm not going to get anywhere. So I've got Helen Bunch, who is the managing director, who is the chair of the KTP project. She sits with us every 4 weeks to see what progress we're making. I've got the industry supervisor, who is the board director for the retail. He opens up a lot of doors for me and making sure that everybody is supportive of the project. From Plymouth University, I've got Professor Steve Goodhue, who was my supervisor from the School of Architecture, Design and Environment. I think that looks like a familiar face to you guys, Professor Shafang. And she's also my academic supervisor, obviously because this has to do with decision making and myself as a facilitator. And since I started, I've also got a support team within the business. So they're all sort of part of the project now that I can actually tap on their help and expertise as we are going along. So my team is gradually sort of growing gradually within the business. What we plan to do is to host regular Green Dragons Den using the framework. The whole aim is to support the business, select innovative technologies, and the benefit for the business is obviously to position ourselves as a pragmatic leader and innovation broker, accelerating the uptake of innovative technologies. Those are just some photographs from the Green Dragons Den, and as you can see, those are the key decision makers that are actively sort of doing their scores. That's a supplier sort of presenting his product to them, and those are my Green Dragons Den. So just to give you a feel of what the day is like. So how are we using this framework? I'm now beginning to go out to customers and say, look, we've got this framework, we can sort of help you. The process would normally, first of all, involve identifying what the customer requirements are, which is the objectives, where I then conduct a stakeholder analysis with the key stakeholders, and then based upon that, I arrange a bespoke Green Dragons Den event for them. So far, I've actually gone out and met a number of their customers. I met the bank, TSB, they're very keen. They want me to run their sustainability initiative. We've got our competitors on the team as well, but they've clearly said that Waits are going to run this project through my framework. So going back to one of our key objectives we wanted was to differentiate ourselves, which this has clearly done where we had our competitor, but they've said they want us to lead this project because I've been to the Co-op, the BBC, the Royal Mail, Standard Chartered Bank, Barings. Just to very briefly say, I'm booked fully till June, and I've had to put a few customers on the waiting list saying, look, I can't do anything till June because I can't attend more than 2 at a time because as you can see, the framework is quite intense. It goes through the 8 steps where I've got to identify the innovations, we've got to do the detailed analysis. So, and since it's the first time we're going out to a customer, I would like to do it properly. Although we're offering it free, but eventually it will probably come with a fee. There are other consultants doing this. They are not even a construction company, and but they have the social media or the business skills to actually get people together. And 2 Degrees is an online platform, you might want to check it up. And they help RBS, which is the bank, source innovations. When I started the project, I got together with them and said, look, is there anything we could work together? They did admit that they did this big innovation gateway, but they didn't have a framework behind it to help them. And I really thought that we could work together, but I was quite surprised that they said, if they were to do an innovation gateway for my company, they would charge us 25 to 30,000 a month. So it's to give you an idea of if I was to commercialize this offering to a customer, but it would probably come maybe in a year or 2, but that's the value that it has that we've actually got. The cheapest option that the company said, because they've got a database of products, maybe about 200, and I said, could I get access to that? And they said 2,500 a month. And there's nothing there that I cannot do. So again, it's just to say what the potential of this course could go. But obviously, you've got to sort of get to the right company for them to be able to appreciate it. So in terms of the support, using this framework, we can help our customers to reduce the carbon footprint, which is sort of a key problem in the construction industry. Like we saw, the government has actually set stringent rules and regulations. We can help them set their environmental objectives by breaking the problem and developing a hierarchy. We can then help them identify and implement potential innovations and help them to deliver energy efficient, low carbon buildings. And in the long run, everybody is looking at making a positive difference to their business and the environment as part of their CSR stuff. So I think that brings it to the end of my long story, but that's the journey so far. I must say it's quite challenging, but we're getting there.
Okay, have we got any questions from the audience? Just wondering, Zainab, what proportion of your effort was required you to use your soft skills, negotiation, persuasion, influencing, listening, as opposed to your hard skills, which is the analytical and evaluation side?
I think I did more of the soft skills, because what happened was that, which really helped, because I was based in Plymouth and I used to go there once a month and I would spend 3 days there, and all I do is observe people around, and then I'm like, this is not right. And then I come back and then I read journals and stuff, and I'm able to know why they're behaving like that. And I think it did help me being not part of the business, because if I was part of them, I would actually sort of accept it the way they are doing stuff. But I was able to dissociate myself from them and go away and do a bit of thinking and come back to them and say, look, I think you guys have got to think differently. Also, I think because, like I said, I had a lot of interest in lean, I always looked at things from a holistic and a systematic view. And I just didn't look at the superficial problems, but I always tried to get to what really is the underlying problem, because we might solve the superficial problem if you don't really get to the underlying. And I must admit that as a business, while I was doing the PhD, when we were at the peak of the recession, I did this between 2011 to 2013. The construction industry was at its worst time ever. The company were not really interested. To be honest, I didn't really get much support from the company, but I think I was just determined that I wanted to do so. I forced myself in. I arranged the Green Dragon's Den. They were more interested in the products, but not the framework. And even when I talk about the framework, they're like, oh, it's academic, and they're more a business, but I was able to sort of, get over that. But now, it's the framework that is differentiating them. It's not the products. And so they are beginning to appreciate that that's our differentiator, but they didn't appreciate that all the time while I was doing the PhD.
Why don't you start your own firm?
I would have, but the thing is that I need to establish myself. And to be honest, even if the company wouldn't have taken this project forward, I think I would have struggled to get a company that would be interested in what I have, because innovation actually takes some time. People need to appreciate it. So although it's a very good framework, but you need the right people. And when I actually put this proposal forward, just for you guys so that you know, innovation is not easy. As a business, you guys are business students, you know that they're always looking for money. It's going to take time for these innovations to be implemented, to change people's attitudes. And the first thing I did was that, because the framework could be applied across the whole group, my team, the retail department, was very small. So, but they really wanted to sort of, one, they didn't give me a job because it was the peak of the recession. My job is not going to generate money in this thing. So they actually put me to the whole group and said I should present to them. They were not interested. So even the same company, they were not interested.
But can't this be a BIM implementation, for example?
Sorry?
A BIM implementation, building information modeling implementation?
BIM is slightly different. BIM is building information modeling.
Yeah, but can't this be part of it?
It could be part of it in the sense that if we have a product, we could probably do, for those of you that don't know what BIM is in architecture, we normally use AutoCAD, which is the 2D part, but the government is trying to go into the 3D, so it's just not seeing a 3D model, but there's a lot of information attached to it, So what we could potentially do is, because one of the problems with innovation is the risk and the uncertainty, and the risk of the product not doing what it says it's going to do. So with BIM, what we could potentially do is to trial it on a model and say this is what it's going to do. But at the same time, in the construction industry, we have something called the energy performance gap, where it's predicted that buildings are going to save X amount of energy. They make all those predictions, and when they actually build, they are nowhere close to what they said. So you could make predictions, but they wouldn't do. But my way of overcoming that is that a lot of my suppliers say that they're going to do a free trial. Some say they're going to give a full refund if the product doesn't do what it says. So going back to the soft skills is like, I really understand what are the barriers. I go back to them and say, look, they are reluctant, but what could you do to make that first move? Because once they have actually implemented your product, then the products would be then rolled out, other people will know about it, and then it's going to be happy days for everybody. But then I'm going to share another experience with you guys. One of my products, which is a heating additive that you actually put into your heating radiator, it could be applied for any wet heating system, houses, schools, whatever, anywhere you've got. It's proven to reduce energy consumption by 15%. When the supplier came in, he gave everybody a bottle, just a small bottle, because everybody's got houses, and said, you know, you can go home and actually try it. It's difficult to get the financial savings in a house because we have quite a varied way of using. He also agreed to do a free trial for one of our offices. He installed the product in December. He did a work-in-progress report for me in January. The building has saved 15%. Everybody's taking it with a pinch of salt. They're saying the results are too good to be true. You know?
15% is a lot.
It's a lot. But the good thing is that I've got Professor Steve Goodyear from Plymouth University. So I've got the supplier to explain to him how he's made his calculations so he can verify whether it's been done properly. I also have my support team within the company, you know. So what I did was that I asked both individual people to independently actually say. And the M&E contractors were very negative. They said the results are too good to be true. But then it makes me say, what if they are too good to be true? Then we are going to miss out, you know? So even though we've gone as far as that, this comes to change management, which is probably something you guys do in other courses. So I'm still struggling with that, you know? And what I've told them that, look, as a business, we're really trying to promote ourselves as an innovation broker. We're trying to help these SMEs. So my next step now I've done is I've arranged for a conference call. I'm going to get the supplier on. I'm going to get the academic supervisor on it. I'm going to get the M&E and a few people within the business and say, ask the supplier whatever you want to ask, but let's get this right, you know? So what tends to happen is that people talk about it in the back, and they make those assumptions which are not right, and because of that, the product never gets, you know? So I think having me on board helps remove those, you know, barriers. Again, that same product, another customer just looked at it and said, it's very expensive. No matter how big a building is, that product is not going to cost more than £1,000. And a few customers spend over £1,000 putting, you know, solar panels or, you know. So they have misconceptions, and the whole idea of this framework is to get to them, to get to the key decision makers, get the supplier to meet the end user, ask them what you have to ask. Don't base it on assumptions. I'm an architect by background. To be honest, this is applied detail. So I only get to the point of understanding what really do you need, and then bridging the right people. And if there's anything, get other people involved, you know. So I'm basically acting as the broker. But in terms of going self-employed, I think I need to establish myself, and hence I've made this move to the London area, because as we know, in Plymouth we don't have many opportunities, so I need to be in the right area. So I'm actually going out to quite a lot of customers now. I'm sort of getting my own presence, so in 2 years' time I would see where that actually takes me.
Okay, have we got any further questions for Zainab? No? Okay, I think we're ready for a vote of thanks. Thank you for that. Was an excellent presentation. I think you really brought the subject to life for us, and we've demonstrated that, you know, there's some very, very valuable real-world application in the decision support area using AHP alongside other techniques. So to synthesize, so that you can evaluate confidently the whole. So I think without further ado, we'd like to share a gift with you as a thank you. So we'd like to make a presentation.